Right now, billions of people are connected to something that didn't exist for most of human history. A student in Morocco can learn from a teacher in America. A small business can sell products to customers on the other side of the planet. A message can travel across the world in seconds. And almost all of this happened within a single lifetime. But the internet wasn't created by one genius sitting alone in a room. It began with military fears, experimental computers, brilliant scientists, failed ideas, and a simple question. Could computers communicate with each other across enormous distances? The answer to that question would eventually transform business, education, entertainment, relationships, politics, and almost every part of modern life. So get comfortable, grab your coffee, and listen carefully until the end. Because today we're going back to the beginning. You'll discover how a small computer network grew into a global system connecting billions of people, how the World Wide Web made the internet accessible to ordinary users, and how companies... Before we start, can I ask you one question? A year from now, will your English be better than it is today? Or will you still be saying, "I'll start next week"? The truth is, most people don't fail because English is difficult. They fail because they never truly commit to it. That's why, for a limited time, I've reduced the price of the Native Flow English coaching experience to just $5. Not because it's worth only $5, but because I don't want money to be the reason you never start. For less than the price of a coffee, you can begin building a skill that can stay with you for the rest of your life. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Click the link in the description. Join us today, and I'll see you inside. Now, let's begin today's lesson. Chapter 1: Before the Internet. The problem that started everything. The internet didn't begin with social media. It didn't begin with online shopping. It didn't begin with videos, emails, or search engines. It began with fear. To understand why, we have to travel back to the 1950s. The world was divided by the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were competing for military power, scientific leadership, and technological superiority. There was no direct war between the two superpowers, but there was constant tension. Each side feared what the other might create next. Then, in October 1957, something happened that shocked the United States. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. For many Americans, this wasn't simply a scientific achievement. It was a warning. If the Soviet Union could send a satellite into space, what other technologies could it develop? Could it build more advanced missiles? Could it gain a military advantage? Could the United States fall behind? Suddenly, science and technology became matters of national security. The American government realized it needed to invest more seriously in research. And in 1958, it created a new organization, ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Its mission was ambitious: support advanced scientific research, develop new technologies, and make sure the United States would never again be surprised by the technological achievements of another country. At this point, nobody was trying to create the internet we know today. There was no dream of social media, no online videos, no global digital economy. Scientists were trying to solve a much more basic problem. Computers couldn't communicate effectively with one another. Now imagine a computer in the 1960s. It wasn't sitting on a desk. It wasn't inside your pocket. Some computers were so large they occupied entire rooms. They were extremely expensive. Only governments, universities, and large organizations could afford them. And here's the problem. A researcher in one university might need access to a powerful computer located hundreds of kilometers away, but there was no simple way to connect to it. Different computers often use different systems. They couldn't easily exchange information. Researchers began asking a revolutionary question. What if computers could communicate through a network? What if information could travel from one machine to another? And what if many computers could share resources? Instead of every research institution needing its own expensive machine? Those questions sound ordinary today, but at the time, they were revolutionary. Now here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Traditional communication systems had a weakness. Imagine making a telephone call. A dedicated connection is created between 2 points. If an important part of that communication system fails, the connection can be interrupted. Researchers began thinking about another approach. What if information didn't travel as one continuous message? What if it could be divided into small pieces, sent through different paths, and then reconstructed when it reached its destination? This idea became known as packet switching. And honestly, it was one of the most important ideas in the history of computer networking. Think about sending a large book through the mail. Instead of sending the entire book in one package, you divide it into hundreds of numbered pages. Each page can travel separately. Some might take one route, others might take another. When they arrive, they're placed back in the correct order. That's a simplified way to understand packet switching. The idea was developed independently by researchers including Paul Baran in the United States and Donald Davies in the United Kingdom. And it helped create the foundation for modern computer networks. Now, imagine the challenge. Scientists didn't only need computers, they needed rules, methods, hardware, software, and entirely new ways of thinking about communication. There was no guidebook explaining how to build a global computer network. They were creating the field as they worked. Little by little, the pieces began coming together. One important figure was J.C.R. Licklider. He imagined a future where computers could form a network, allowing people to access information and programs from different locations. At a time when most people saw computers as giant calculating machines, Licklider saw something more. He saw communication, connection, and the possibility of humans using computers to share knowledge. His ideas influenced researchers working at ARPA, and eventually, those ideas helped inspire a real experimental network. Its name was ARPANET. In 1969, the first computers were connected. One was at UCLA, another was at the Stanford Research Institute. The researchers wanted to send a simple message, the word Logan. They typed the letter L. It arrived. Then O. It arrived too. Then they typed G, and the system crashed. The first message sent across ARPANET was simply LO. Honestly, it's almost funny. One of the greatest technological revolutions in human history began with a computer crash. But the experiment was still a success. 2 computers had communicated across a network. Soon, more institutions joined. 4 computers became connected, then more. The network slowly expanded. Researchers could share resources, send information, and experiment with new forms of digital communication. But nobody knew how far this idea would eventually go. The people building ARPANET weren't watching movies online. They weren't ordering food from apps. They weren't posting photographs of their vacations. They were simply trying to make computers communicate. Yet that small network created something extraordinary: a foundation, a starting point, a new way for information to travel. And here's the most important lesson from this chapter. Great inventions rarely appear fully formed. They begin with problems, questions, experiments, failures, and small successes that almost nobody notices. In 1969, only a handful of computers were connected. Today, billions of devices communicate through networks every single day. Computers, phones, cars, satellites, factories, hospitals, homes. The digital world began with a few researchers asking a simple question: could computers talk to one another? The answer was yes. But connecting a few computers was only the beginning, because as more networks appeared, a new problem emerged. Different networks couldn't easily communicate with each other. The world had networks, but it still didn't have the internet. To create that, scientists would need to invent a common language that could connect completely different computer systems, and that breakthrough would change everything. Chapter 2: The Birth of the Internet, the language that connected the world. By the early 1970s, something remarkable had happened. ARPANET was growing. More universities, more research centers, more computers, more people exchanging information. What had started as a small experiment was becoming a real network. But there was a serious problem. ARPANET wasn't the only network being developed. Other computer networks were appearing. Some used radio, others used satellites. Different institutions were creating different systems, and those systems couldn't easily communicate with one another. Think about it like this. Imagine traveling to a place where every city speaks a completely different language. You can communicate inside your own city, but the moment you leave, nobody understands you. That's exactly what was happening with computer networks. They could communicate internally, but they couldn't communicate easily with other networks. Researchers realized something important. If computer networking was going to grow, they needed a universal language, a set of rules that different computers and different networks could understand. Those rules are called protocols. And honestly, the creation of those protocols would become one of the most important moments in the history of the internet. 2 researchers played a major role in solving this problem: Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn. Kahn had been working on computer networking projects and began thinking about how completely different networks could communicate. The challenge was enormous. A radio network might work differently from a satellite network. A satellite network might work differently from ARPANET. How could all of them exchange information without forcing every network to become identical? The solution was brilliant. Instead of changing every network, create a common system that allowed them to communicate. Cerf and Kahn began developing what would eventually become TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, and Internet Protocol. Now, those names may sound complicated, but the basic idea is surprisingly simple. Imagine sending a large package across the world. First, the information is divided into smaller pieces. Each piece receives information about where it needs to go. The pieces travel across the network. They don't necessarily travel through exactly the same path. When they reach the destination, they're checked, organized, and reconstructed into the original information. One part of the system helps manage the reliable delivery of data. Another helps direct the data toward the correct destination. Together, these protocols allowed different networks to communicate. And that's where the word internet becomes important. An internet, in the original technical sense, was a network of networks. Not one giant computer, not one central machine controlling everything. Many networks connected together using common rules. That's the idea that made global communication possible. Now, here's something fascinating. The internet wasn't designed as one perfect system that was completed and then released to the world. It evolved. Researchers tested ideas, found problems, changed designs, improved protocols, and continued experimenting. That's how many revolutionary technologies develop, not through one magical moment, but through years of collaboration and improvement. Now let's return to ARPANET. As the network expanded, people began discovering uses that its creators hadn't fully expected. One of the most important was email. In 1971, computer engineer Ray Tomlinson developed a system for sending messages between computers on a network. He also helped popularize the use of the @ symbol to separate a user's name from the computer hosting the account. Today, the @ symbol feels completely ordinary. You see it in email addresses, usernames, social media. But at the time, this was part of a completely new way of communicating, and people loved it. Researchers could send messages without making phone calls, without mailing letters, without needing to be in the same place. Email quickly became one of the most popular uses of computer networks. Think about that. Even before the internet became available to ordinary people, humans were already discovering one of its most important purposes: communication. People don't only want machines to exchange information, they want to connect with other people. And honestly, that human desire would drive almost every major stage of the internet's future growth. Now, let's move forward to one of the most important dates in internet history, January 1st, 1983. On that day, ARPANET officially switched to TCP/IP. Sometimes, this date is described as the birthday of the modern internet. Why? Because the common protocol allowed different networks to communicate using the same fundamental system. The internet was no longer simply an idea. The technical foundation was becoming real. But there was still a major problem. Using computer networks was difficult. You needed specialized knowledge. You often needed to remember numerical addresses. The internet existed, but it wasn't friendly, it wasn't visual, it wasn't simple, and it definitely wasn't something the average family used at home. Imagine having to remember a long number every time you wanted to find something online. That would be frustrating. So researchers developed another important system, the Domain Name System, DNS. It was introduced in the 1980s. The basic idea was simple. Instead of forcing humans to remember numerical internet addresses, people could use names. Names are easier to remember. Computers could translate those names into numerical addresses behind the scenes. Think about the internet today. You type the name of a website. You don't normally think about the servers, the addresses, the routing systems, or the protocols working underneath. You simply expect it to work. DNS helped make that experience possible. Now, here's something important to understand. At this stage, the Internet and the World Wide Web were not the same thing. In fact, the World Wide Web didn't exist yet. The Internet was the infrastructure, the network connecting networks. The web would later become one of the most important services built on top of that infrastructure. Imagine the Internet as a global system of roads. The roads exist. Cities are connected. Vehicles can travel. But there are no easy maps, no simple signs, no convenient way for ordinary people to explore everything. That's roughly where the Internet was during the 1980s. Scientists, researchers, universities, and government institutions were connected. Information was moving. Email was growing. The technical foundation was becoming stronger. But the digital revolution hadn't reached ordinary people yet. That would require another breakthrough. And this time, the idea wouldn't begin in the United States. It would begin at a European research laboratory. A British computer scientist was frustrated by how difficult it was to organize and share information. His name was Tim Berners-Lee. And the solution he created would transform the Internet from a system used mainly by specialists into something ordinary people could. Chapter 3: The World Wide Web, the invention that opened the Internet to everyone. By the late 1980s, the Internet existed. Computers could communicate. Networks could exchange information. Researchers could send emails. Universities could share data. The foundation was there. But for most ordinary people, the Internet was still invisible, difficult, technical, and honestly, not very exciting. There were no modern websites, no familiar homepages, no clickable images leading you from one place to another. No simple search box where you could type a question and receive millions of results. The Internet had enormous potential, but it was missing something. A simple way to explore information. And the person who would help solve this problem wasn't trying to become famous. He wasn't trying to build one of the biggest inventions in history. He was simply frustrated. His name was Tim Berners-Lee. In the 1980s, Berners-Lee was working at CERN, a major scientific research organization in Europe. Thousands of researchers came to CERN from different countries. They used different computers, different software, different systems for storing information, and this created a problem. Important information was everywhere, but finding it was difficult. Imagine working in an enormous library. The library contains millions of valuable documents, but there's no clear catalog, no simple organization, no easy way to move from one related document to another. The information exists, but accessing it is frustrating. Berners-Lee believed there had to be a better way, and honestly, this is how many world-changing ideas begin, not with someone asking, "How can I change history?" but with someone asking, "Why is this so difficult?" In 1989, Berners-Lee wrote a proposal. His idea was to create a system where documents stored on different computers could be connected through links. One piece of information could lead to another. A document about physics could connect to information about a scientist. That page could connect to another research paper. That paper could connect to another institution. Information would no longer feel like separate islands. It would become a web. A World Wide Web. Now, here's something incredibly important. The internet and the World Wide Web are not the same thing. People often use those terms as if they mean exactly the same thing. They don't. The internet is the global infrastructure that allows computer networks to communicate. The web is a system of connected pages and information that operates on top of the internet. Think about it like this. The internet is the road system. The web is one of the most important services traveling on those roads. Email also uses the internet. Online games use the internet. Video calls use the internet. But none of those things are the World Wide Web itself. Berners-Lee wasn't inventing the internet. He was creating a revolutionary new way to use it. To make his idea work, several important technologies were needed. HTML, the language used to structure web pages. HTTP, the system that allows browsers and servers to communicate. And URLs, the addresses used to locate resources on the web. These technologies may sound ordinary today, but together, they created something extraordinary, a system where information could be published, connected, and explored. In 1990, Berners-Lee created the first web browser and the first web server. Then, in 1991, the World Wide Web began becoming available to people outside CERN. At first, the web was small, extremely small. Nothing like the digital universe we know today. But the idea was powerful. Anyone connected to the internet could potentially access information from another computer. And hyperlinks changed everything. Imagine reading a document. You see a highlighted word. You click it. Instantly, you're taken to another document. Today, that feels completely normal. But at the time, it changed the experience of using computers. Information was no longer something you had to search for through complicated commands. You could explore it, follow ideas, move from one page to another, get lost in information. Honestly, that's still one of the most powerful things about the web today. You begin searching for one question, and 30 minutes later, you're learning about something you never expected. Now, here's one of the most important decisions in the entire history of technology. Berners-Lee could have tried to control the web. He could have attempted to charge people for using the fundamental technology. Instead, CERN made the web technology available on a royalty-free basis in 1993. That decision helped the web spread. Developers could build websites. Organizations could publish information. Universities could share research. Businesses could experiment. Anyone with the necessary skills and access could participate. And honestly, that openness helped create the explosive growth that followed. But there was still a problem. The early web wasn't very attractive. Many pages were mostly text. Using the web still required some technical knowledge. Ordinary people needed something simpler, a better browser, a visual browser, a browser that could make the web feel exciting. Then, in 1993, a new browser appeared, Mosaic, developed at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Mosaic helped make the web more visual and easier to use. Text and images could appear together on the same page. Navigation became simpler. More people began understanding what the web could become. One of the people who worked on Mosaic was Mark Andreessen. He later co-founded Netscape, and Netscape Navigator became one of the most popular early web browsers. Suddenly, the web was growing rapidly. New websites appeared. News organizations went online. Universities published information. Businesses began experimenting with digital commerce. Ordinary people started hearing strange new phrases: website, homepage, surfing the web. The internet was entering popular culture. Now imagine being alive during this period. Someone tells you that one day you'll use a computer to buy clothes. Talk face to face with someone on another continent. Watch millions of videos. Study at home. Build a business without owning a physical store. Or carry almost all human knowledge inside your pocket. You might have thought they were crazy, but the transformation had already begun. Now here's where the story becomes even more interesting. As the number of websites exploded, a new problem appeared. How do you find anything? Imagine a library adding millions of books every year. Without an effective catalog, the web was becoming enormous. People needed better tools to organize information. Early search engines appeared. Yahoo began as a directory of websites. Other search tools tried to index the rapidly growing web. Then, in the late 1990s, two university students developed a different approach. Instead of simply looking at how often words appeared on a page, their system analyzed relationships between websites. Links could help indicate which pages were important. Their names were Larry Page and Sergey Brin. The company they created was Google. And honestly, search engines changed the internet again. The web wasn't only growing, it was becoming searchable, useful, commercial, and increasingly necessary. By the end of the 1990s, millions of people were going online. Businesses rushed to create websites. Investors poured money into internet companies. Entrepreneurs believed almost anything connected to the web could become successful. A new digital economy was being born. But excitement was growing faster than reality. Many internet companies had enormous valuations, but weak business models. Some had almost no profits. Some had almost no customers. And investors continued giving them money. The internet had created extraordinary possibilities, but it had also created a financial bubble, and soon that bubble would burst. Companies would disappear. Investors would lose billions. People would begin questioning whether the internet revolution had been exaggerated. But the internet wasn't going away. In fact, the next stage would make it even more powerful. Because after the crash, a new generation of companies would emerge. Companies that didn't simply put information online. They would turn ordinary people into creators. They would connect billions of users. They would transform communication, friendship, entertainment, business, and human attention itself. The age of social media was coming. Chapter 4. The Internet Revolution. Google, social media, and the digital economy. At the beginning of the 2000s, the internet had a problem. Too much excitement, too much money, and too many promises. Investors had poured billions of dollars into internet companies. Some of those companies had strong ideas. Others had beautiful websites, expensive offices, and almost no real business. People believed the internet would change everything. They were right. But they were wrong about how quickly it would happen. Then, the bubble burst. Internet companies collapsed. Investors lost enormous amounts of money. Businesses disappeared. Thousands of people lost their jobs. And suddenly, the future of the internet didn't look quite so exciting. Some people began wondering, was the internet just another temporary trend? Honestly, we know the answer today. The internet wasn't dying, it was growing up. The companies that survived had to prove something important. They needed to create real value, real products, real services, real reasons for people to return every day. And from the remains of the dot-com crash, a new internet began to emerge. Now let's start with Google. Search engines already existed, but as the web became larger, finding useful information became increasingly difficult. Imagine entering a library containing billions of pages, but having no reliable way to find the best one. Google helped solve that problem. Its search engine used links between websites as part of the process of deciding which pages might be useful and important. The idea was simple, but powerful. Instead of treating every website equally, the system tried to understand relationships between pages. Little by little, Google became the place people went when they wanted to find almost anything online. A question, a restaurant, a product, a person, a piece of information, and honestly, search changed human behavior. Before the internet, if you didn't know something, you might ask someone, visit a library, read a book, or simply live without knowing the answer. Now, you could type a few words and receive information within seconds. Knowledge was becoming easier to access than at any other moment in human history. But the internet was about to change again. Because people didn't only want to consume information, they wanted to participate. They wanted to create, share, comment, connect, and express themselves. This period became associated with a new idea, Web 2.0. The term described an internet that was becoming more interactive. The early web was largely a place where people visited websites and read information. The new web allowed ordinary users to create the information themselves. Blogs grew, forums expanded, people uploaded photographs, wrote reviews, shared opinions, created profiles. The internet was becoming social. Now imagine being online in the early 2000s. For many people, the internet was still something they accessed through a desktop computer. You went online, used the internet, then disconnected and returned to ordinary life. The internet was a place you visited. Soon, that would completely change. One of the first major social networking platforms was Friendster. Then came MySpace. Millions of people created personal profiles, added friends, shared music, posted photographs. For the first time, your online identity became an important part of your social life. Then, in 2004, Facebook launched. At first, it was limited to university students, but it expanded rapidly. Soon, people from around the world were creating profiles, sharing updates, posting photographs, connecting with friends, finding people they hadn't spoken to in years. The internet was no longer simply connecting computers. It was mapping human relationships. Think about how extraordinary that was. A person in Morocco could communicate instantly with someone in Canada. A family separated by thousands of kilometers could share photographs every day. Old friends could reconnect. Communities could form around shared interests. The world was becoming connected in a way humanity had never experienced before. Then, another revolution began. Video. For years, online video had been difficult. Internet connections were slow, video files were large, watching something online could be frustrating. Then, in 2005, YouTube launched. The idea was incredibly simple. allow ordinary people to upload videos, and allow anyone to watch them. Suddenly, you didn't need a television station to reach an audience. You didn't need a movie studio. You didn't need expensive distribution. You needed a camera, an internet connection, and something people wanted to watch. Honestly, that changed media forever. Teachers could teach millions. Musicians could find audiences. Comedians could become famous. Businesses could advertise. Ordinary people could build careers from their bedrooms. The difference between a media producer and a media consumer was disappearing. People became both. Now here's something fascinating. For most of human history, reaching 1 million people required enormous power. You needed newspapers, radio stations, television networks, political influence, or significant wealth. The internet changed that. One person with one idea could potentially reach millions. That's an extraordinary amount of opportunity, but also an extraordinary amount of influence. And we would later discover that influence could create serious problems too. Now let's talk about business. The internet didn't only change communication, it changed how people bought and sold almost everything. Amazon had started as an online bookstore in the 1990s, but over time, it expanded. Books became electronics. Electronics became clothing, home products, food, digital services, almost anything people could buy. Shopping no longer required traveling to a physical store. Your home became the store. Your screen became the shelf. Your search bar became the salesperson. And the digital economy continued growing. Another company transformed online advertising. Google. Businesses could place advertisements connected to what people were searching for. Think about how powerful that was. Someone searching for a hotel could immediately see advertisements for hotels. Someone searching for shoes could see advertisements for shoes. Advertising became more targeted, more measurable, and more connected to data. Data was becoming one of the most valuable resources in the digital economy. What people searched for, what they clicked, what they watched, what they bought, how long they stayed on a page. The internet wasn't only connecting people, it was learning about them. And honestly, that would become one of the biggest debates of the 21st century. Privacy. Who owns your data? What should companies be allowed to collect? How much do platforms know about you? What happens when algorithms understand your interests better than some of your friends do? Those questions are still being debated today. Now let's return to social media. In 2006, Twitter launched. Its short messages encouraged fast public conversations, news, jokes, political opinions, arguments, breaking events. People could communicate directly with celebrities, politicians, companies, and strangers around the world. Information began moving faster, sometimes too fast. A photograph could spread across the world in minutes. A rumor could do the same. The internet had created something humanity had never experienced before. Global communication at enormous speed. And speed changes everything. Now, here's another major transformation. For years, the internet lived mostly inside computers. Then, it moved into our pockets. In 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone. Smartphones existed before it. But the iPhone helped accelerate a new era of mobile computing. A phone was no longer simply a device for calls. It became a camera, a music player, a map, a browser, a communication device, and eventually, a platform for millions of applications. The internet was no longer somewhere you went. It was something you carried, everywhere. Then app stores expanded the possibilities. Developers could create applications, games, social networks, navigation tools, educational platforms, banking services, delivery apps. Entire industries began appearing around smartphones. Soon, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, TikTok, and many other platforms would reshape how people communicated, created content, and spent their attention. Now think about how quickly this transformation happened. In only a few decades, the internet went from 4 connected computers to billions of people carrying powerful network devices in their pockets. That's one of the fastest technological transformations in human history. But something else was changing too. The internet was becoming part of everyday survival. People used it to find jobs, study, work, manage money, communicate with governments, run businesses, receive medical information, and maintain relationships. Then, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic forced millions of people to depend on the internet more than ever before. Schools moved online, meetings moved online, businesses moved online, families used video calls to stay connected. The internet became essential infrastructure, not simply entertainment, not simply technology, infrastructure, like electricity, roads, and communication networks. But the more powerful the internet became, the more complicated its problems became too. Misinformation, cybercrime, privacy concerns, online addiction, political polarization, data collection, mental health concerns. The same technology that connected humanity could also divide it. The same platforms that gave everyone a voice could spread false information. The same algorithms that helped people discover useful content could also keep them scrolling for hours. And honestly, this is one of the most important lessons in the history of technology. Every powerful invention creates opportunities, and every powerful invention creates new responsibilities. The internet gave ordinary people access to more information, more communication, and more opportunity than previous generations could have imagined. But it also created challenges that humanity is still learning how to manage. And the story isn't finished, because the next stage of the internet may transform our lives even more dramatically than social media and smartphones did. Artificial intelligence, connected devices, virtual worlds, faster networks, machines that can create text, images, music, videos, and software. The internet is entering another chapter, and this time, the biggest question isn't simply how humans will use the internet. It's how intelligent machines will change what the internet becomes. In the final chapter, we'll explore the internet of today, the rise of artificial intelligence, the challenges of the digital world, and the question nobody can answer with certainty. What comes next? This chapter is finished. Can I continue to Chapter 5? The Internet Today, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of the Connected World. Chapter 5. The Internet Today, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of the Connected World. The story of the Internet began with a question. Could computers communicate with one another? Decades later, that question almost feels small. Today, the internet connects billions of people, Businesses, governments, hospitals, schools, factories, vehicles, satellites, and billions of devices. But here's the fascinating part. The internet is still changing, and honestly, we may be entering one of the most important periods in its entire history. For most of the internet's existence, humans created information. Humans wrote articles, designed websites, uploaded photographs, recorded videos, created music, wrote software. Machines helped us store, organize, and distribute that information. But now, something fundamental is changing. Machines are beginning to create too. Artificial intelligence can generate text, images, music, videos, computer code, and answers to complex questions. It can translate languages, analyze enormous amounts of information, recognize patterns, help scientists conduct research, assist doctors, support students, and change how millions of people work. Think about how extraordinary that is. The first computer networks were created so machines could exchange information. Now, those machines are beginning to help create the information itself. And honestly, that may completely transform the internet again. Now imagine opening the internet 10 years from today. Will you search for information the same way? Maybe not. Instead of opening 10 websites, you might ask an intelligent system a question and receive a personalized explanation. Instead of spending hours learning complicated software, you might simply describe what you want to create: a website, a video, a song, a business plan, a computer program, and artificial intelligence may help you build it. This creates enormous opportunities. A student with limited resources could have access to personalized education. A small business owner could use tools once available only to large companies. Scientists could analyze information faster. People with disabilities could communicate more easily. Language barriers could become smaller. Entirely new careers could appear. But history teaches us something important. Every technological revolution creates new problems too. The printing press spread knowledge, but it also spread propaganda. Television created mass communication, but it also created new forms of manipulation. Social media connected billions of people, but it also created concerns about addiction, misinformation, privacy, and mental health. Artificial intelligence will be no different. The technology itself is powerful, but the real question is, how will humans choose to use it? Now let's talk about information. The early internet had a problem. There wasn't enough information available online. Today, we have the opposite problem. There's too much. Millions of articles, billions of videos, countless posts, messages, opinions, advertisements, notifications. Every day, more information is created than any human being could consume in an entire lifetime. So the challenge has changed. The problem is no longer finding information. The problem is deciding what deserves your attention. And honestly, attention may be one of the most valuable resources in the modern world. Think about your phone. Every application wants your attention. Every notification asks you to return. Every platform wants you to stay longer. Watch another video, read another post, open another message, scroll one more time. Why? Because attention has economic value. The longer you stay, the more advertisements you can see. The more data platforms can collect. The more they can learn about your interests. This has created something previous generations never had to manage. An environment where thousands of companies are competing for moments of your life. That's why one of the most important skills of the future may not be learning how to access information. It may be learning when to disconnect from it. Now, here's another major transformation. The internet is leaving our screens. For years, we connected computers, then smartphones. Now, almost everything can become connected. Cars, watches, televisions, cameras, home appliances, factories, medical devices, cities. This is often called the Internet of Things. The basic idea is simple. Physical objects can collect data, communicate, and respond to information through networks. Imagine a city where traffic lights automatically respond to congestion, a farm where sensors detect when crops need water, a medical device that warns a doctor before a patient experiences a serious problem, a home that reduces energy consumption automatically. These technologies could make life safer, more efficient, and more convenient. But again, they create important questions. Who owns the data? Who protects it? What happens if connected systems are attacked? How much privacy are people willing to exchange for convenience? These aren't questions for the distant future. They're questions we're already facing. Now let's talk about cybersecurity. The early internet was created by researchers who largely trusted one another. The modern internet connects billions of strangers. Money moves online, private conversations happen online, businesses store valuable information online, governments depend on digital systems. That makes cybersecurity incredibly important. Hackers can steal information, attack companies, disrupt infrastructure, spread malicious software, and manipulate people into revealing sensitive information. As the internet becomes more important, protecting it becomes more important too. The future of the internet isn't only about building faster systems. It's about building safer ones. Now here's something else worth thinking about. For most of history, where you lived strongly determined what opportunities you had. If you lived far from a great university, you couldn't easily study there. If you lived far from major businesses, finding certain jobs was difficult. If you wanted to reach a global audience, you needed enormous resources. The internet changed that, not perfectly. Digital inequality still exists. Billions of people still don't have the same quality of access. But the internet has allowed opportunities to travel across borders in ways previous generations could never have imagined. A student can learn from teachers on another continent. A programmer can work for a company thousands of kilometers away. An artist can find an international audience. A small business can reach customers around the world. A person can learn a new language, build a skill, find a community, and completely change the direction of their life. Honestly, that's one of the most extraordinary achievements of the internet. It reduced the distance between people and opportunity. Now imagine the researchers who connected those first computers in 1969. What would they think if they saw the internet today? Would they believe that billions of people would carry connected computers in their pockets? Would they imagine video calls between continents, online universities, digital currencies, social media, artificial intelligence? Probably not. And that's what makes the future so difficult to predict. The biggest changes often begin as small experiments. Remember ARPANET, a handful of computers. Remember the first message, LO. Remember the early web, a small number of simple pages. Remember the first social networks, basic profiles, simple messages. Every revolution begins somewhere. And the next one may already be happening. Maybe artificial intelligence will transform education. Maybe virtual and augmented reality will change how people experience the internet. Maybe new technologies will create more decentralized digital systems. Maybe billions of additional devices will become connected. Maybe the internet will become so integrated into everyday life that future generations will stop thinking of it as a separate technology. Just as people don't constantly think about electricity, they may not think about being online. The internet may simply become part of the environment around them. But here's the most important lesson from this entire story. Technology doesn't decide the future alone, people do. The internet can educate, or distract, connect or divide, create opportunity or increase inequality, spread truth or spread misinformation, protect freedom or threaten privacy. The same technology can produce completely different outcomes. It depends on how we build it, how we regulate it, how we use it, and what values we choose to protect. That's why understanding the history of the internet matters. Because the internet didn't appear magically. People built it. Researchers, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, governments, companies, and eventually, billions of ordinary users. Each generation changed it. And now, we're part of the generation deciding what it becomes next. Think about that. Every time you publish something, share information, build an online community, create a business, teach someone, or choose how to spend your attention, you're participating in the history of the internet. The story isn't finished. We're living inside it. Before we end this episode, let's return to where everything began. A world where computers couldn't communicate. A fear that one country might fall behind technologically. A group of researchers trying to solve difficult problems. A network connecting 4 computers. A message that crashed after 2 letters. LO. From that small beginning came a system that transformed human civilization. The internet changed how we communicate, how we learn, how we work, how we shop, how we build relationships, how we entertain ourselves, how we understand the world, and perhaps even how we understand ourselves. But the greatest lesson of the internet may be surprisingly simple. Human beings have always wanted to connect, to share ideas, to learn from one another, to tell stories, to build communities. Technology changed the speed, the distance, and the scale, but the human desire behind it has always been there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, the internet was created by people who imagined connections that didn't yet exist. The future will be created by people willing to imagine what comes next. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and use the connected world wisely, because the next chapter of internet history is being written right now.